What if space doesn't just affect the body, but the mind? Astronauts have already experienced things they simply couldn't explain. Visions, sounds, a strange feeling, like someone is there. And the most unsettling question, what if it's not hallucinations?
Not long ago, astronomers were surprised by a small, seemingly unremarkable moon of Saturn, Hyperion. At first glance, it doesn't look like much. Just a chunk of rock, irregularly shaped, dark, covered in craters. It almost looks like pumice, like a porous piece of debris drifting through space. But behind that simple appearance, there's something strange. Hyperion emits powerful streams of charged particles, shooting them out at incredible speeds in all directions. And to this day, no one really understands what's powering it. And Hyperion is just one example. Because space keeps throwing mysteries at us. Things that don't quite fit into the way we understand reality. We tend to think of the universe as cold, distant, indifferent. An empty place where everything follows clear, predictable laws. But the deeper we go, the more we run into things that break those expectations. Objects that behave unpredictably, energy sources we still don't understand, processes that refuse to fully make sense. And here's the most important part so far. We've only been watching all of this from a distance. But what happens when we get closer? When we're no longer just observers, but part of it?
Hey, I'm Liam, and you're watching Cosmic Nomad. Here, we explore some of the strangest, most unsettling, and still unexplained phenomena in the universe. And today, we're asking one of the most unusual questions: can space actually affect the human mind?
Even in Earth's orbit, astronauts sometimes report strange experiences. They see things that shouldn't be there. They hear sounds with no clear source. And sometimes, there's this feeling that someone else is nearby. These experiences don't fit neatly into any scientific explanation. That's why they've been given an informal name, the Solaris Effect. The name comes from the science fiction novel Solaris. In the story, a mysterious ocean on a distant planet interacts with the human mind, bringing back memories, fears, even people from the past. It doesn't just exist next to humans, it responds to them. But what if there's at least a grain of truth in that idea? What if somewhere in the universe there are environments that can actually affect the human mind? And if that's the case, what have we already encountered without fully understanding it? To answer that, we need to take a closer look at the strangest phenomena we already know exist and figure out what they might really be capable of. But we don't have to go far to encounter something unexplained. Sometimes it happens right here on Earth. You'd think our planet has already been studied inside and out, but it seems it might have a voice of its own, and not everyone can hear it. For decades, scientists have been tracking a mysterious, low-frequency hum reported in different parts of the world. Only about 2% of people can hear it, usually between the ages of 55 and 70, and those who do don't consider it a gift. They report severe headaches, nausea, weakness, dizziness, insomnia. Some say they can't even fall asleep because the sound never stops. A deep, pulsing tone that just won't go away. Many describe it as torture. In some cases, so unbearable that people begin to think about extreme ways to escape it. The first large-scale reports date back to 1970, when around 800 people heard the sound at the same time. Since then, similar cases have been recorded across the world, especially in cities like Leeds and Bristol in the UK, as well as New Mexico and Sydney. According to those who experience it, the hum is mostly heard indoors and becomes stronger at night. But the strangest part is no one knows exactly what causes it. Some scientists believe it's a kind of auditory illusion linked to the brain. Others suggest low-frequency electromagnetic waves or even seismic activity. And then there are those who think we're simply dealing with something we don't fully understand yet.
And this is where it gets really interesting. We're used to looking for answers in physics. But what if the effect goes deeper? What if phenomena like this don't just affect the body, but the way we perceive reality itself? And if we're already encountering things like this here on Earth, then what's waiting for us out there, in space?
Sometimes Earth reveals its nature in a much more visible way. For example, through a phenomenon known as St. Elmo's fire. It appears on the tips of pointed objects, ship masts, towers, spires, even isolated trees. And it can look very different, like dancing flames, a soft, glowing light, or even something resembling a strange, almost unreal firework. This phenomenon occurs when the electric field in the atmosphere becomes extremely strong, usually during thunderstorms or severe snowstorms. On its own, St. Elmo's fire isn't dangerous. But there's a catch. It often appears just minutes before a powerful lightning strike, which makes it a warning, a signal that energy in that area is about to reach its peak. So if you ever see it, it's best to keep your distance. Today, we know that St. Elmo's fire is a type of corona discharge caused by strong electric fields. As far back as the 19th century, the British scientist William Crookes was able to reproduce a similar effect in the lab. But even now, questions remain. Why does the discharge take so many different forms, streams, brushes, glowing spheres? And more importantly, how do phenomena like this affect technology and the human body, including the nervous system and the mind? And once again, we come back to the same question. If even familiar natural phenomena can affect us in ways we don't fully understand, then what happens when we encounter something truly unknown? Earth still holds many mysteries, but space even more so. Out there, in its vast expanse, there are phenomena that science still can't fully explain. And some of them may affect the human mind so strongly that it comes dangerously close to losing control. And this isn't coming from random speculation. It comes from astronauts, people trained to remain calm, focused, and psychologically stable under extreme conditions. Yet even they describe experiences in space that are difficult to explain. Moments where the so-called Solaris Effect and other strange phenomena seem to become much more intense.
And this is a key point. When we hear about unexplained phenomena, we usually imagine something distant, abstract. But here, we're talking about direct human experience. People operating in extreme, yet highly controlled, conditions. Astronauts go through intense psychological training. They understand how their bodies work, how the brain responds to stress. They're trained to recognize illusions. So when people like that start describing unusual sensations, it's not something you can easily dismiss as imagination.
And we don't have to go far for an example. One of the strangest anomalies can be encountered almost immediately after entering space. It was described in detail by former NASA astronaut Terry Virts.
This is an interesting case because it highlights the difference between knowing something and actually experiencing it. Virts had already heard about these flashes from other astronauts, but like with many things, until it happens to you, it's just a story.
On the fifth night of his first mission, Virts closed his eyes. And in that moment, a sudden flash of light blinded him, even through his eyelids. No sound, no warning, just a powerful burst of light and an immediate sense of unease, something he couldn't ignore.
And the strangest part isn't just the flash itself, it's how the brain reacts to it. Seeing light with your eyes closed breaks your basic sense of reality. Your brain can't immediately explain what's happening, and that's exactly where the unease comes from. At that point, it's no longer just a physical event, it becomes something that interferes with perception itself.
Later, it became clear what caused the flash. It was something known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, or SAA, a region where Earth's magnetic field is weaker than usual, allowing radiation to penetrate much deeper than it normally would.
Put simply, Earth's magnetic field normally acts like a shield. It deflects most of the charged particles coming from the sun. But over the South Atlantic, that shield kind of dips. And those particles get much closer, including to the region where satellites and space stations operate.
Inside the SAA, onboard computers can fail completely, and astronauts are exposed to higher levels of radiation. That makes this region one of the most dangerous environments for space missions.
And this is where scale really matters. In space, everything depends on technology. Navigation, communication, life support, it's all tied to electronics. So when something fails in a region like this, it's not just a malfunction. It's a situation where the crew could lose control of the spacecraft.
To understand where this anomaly comes from, we need to look at something called the Van Allen radiation belts. These are two layers of charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field.
These belts are formed by solar radiation. The sun constantly releases streams of charged particles, and Earth essentially captures them with its magnetic field. Under normal conditions, this acts as a protective system. But because Earth's magnetic axis is slightly tilted, that protection isn't evenly distributed.
As a result, over the South Atlantic, these radiation belts dip closer to Earth. And that's how a region of increased radiation forms the South Atlantic Anomaly.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. This region isn't static. According to NASA data, it's slowly drifting, and even starting to split into two separate zones, which suggests that the process behind it isn't fully stable, and we still don't completely understand what's causing it.
It could be the result of ancient processes deep within the Earth, or maybe something external that we don't yet understand. But that's not the main point. Even if we can partly explain the physical nature of these phenomena, we still don't fully understand how they affect us. That Flash Verts experienced it wasn't just radiation. It was something processed through perception, through the brain, which means the line between a physical event and a subjective experience becomes very thin. And it's right at that boundary that what we call the Solaris Effect begins. The point where space stops being just a place and starts affecting the person themselves.
From high above, Earth almost doesn't feel real. A thin blue line of atmosphere, and beneath it everything that makes life possible. Oceans, mountains, deserts, everything we know, everything we care about, contained within this small, fragile world. And that's where the contrast hits. We're used to thinking of Earth as something vast, but from space, it looks almost defenseless. And that feeling changes the way you think. You start to realize just how thin the line is between life and the emptiness around it.
Many astronauts have described this effect. Yuri Gagarin, Alexei Leonov, Chris Hadfield, Scott Kelly. They recall it as if they were discovering Earth all over again, noticing its beauty and details that once felt ordinary.
There's another important detail. From orbit, you don't see borders, no countries, no divisions. All the lines we consider important simply disappear. And in that moment, you realize those differences are mostly artificial, and life on this planet is one.
Many astronauts describe it as the feeling that all of humanity is on the same ship. Small, fragile, drifting through endless space. And that experience doesn't just fade away, it changes how you see your own life, your priorities, your goals, what actually matters. Some say it feels like looking at yourself from a distance, as if you're seeing your life from the outside. And when they return to Earth, many feel the need to make changes, to spend more time with people, with nature, with the things that truly matter, and less time chasing status, consumption, and constant achievement.
And here's what's interesting. In one case, space triggers fear and anxiety. In another, it creates a deep sense of connection and gratitude. But in both cases, the same thing is happening. It changes how we perceive the world. And maybe that's the most powerful effect of all the one we encounter beyond Earth. Not just physical, but something that reshapes the human mind.
And if space is already capable of affecting our minds like this, then it raises a question: where is the line between reality and what we're only beginning to understand? But the strangest part doesn't even begin when you're looking at Earth. It begins when Earth seems to come back to you. Even when they're far out in space, astronauts sometimes describe a feeling of being transported back, not physically, but through the mind. This is often referred to as a transformation of perception, or, as astronauts themselves call it, the FSS phenomenon, short for fantastic dreamlike states. And it's this experience that many connect to what we call the Solaris Effect.
Put simply, this isn't just a dream, and it's not a typical hallucination either. It's a state where a person seems to exist in two realities at once. On one hand, they're fully aware that they're in space. But on the other, their mind generates images and sensations so vivid that they feel completely real. And in that moment, the line between what's out there and what's happening inside the mind begins to blur.
This phenomenon may have been experienced by the very first human in space, Yuri Gagarin. After returning to Earth, he once heard a melody at a concert that felt strangely familiar. even though, according to him, he had first heard it during his flight, which is difficult to explain. Because in space, there is no sound. It's a vacuum. Music shouldn't exist there. And this is where a contradiction appears. If sound is physically impossible, but a person still hears it, then the source isn't external. It's internal. But that raises another question. Why these sounds? And why do they feel so real? And Gagarin wasn't the only one. Many astronauts have reported similar experiences. Music, noise, whistling, a low, persistent hum. The crew of Apollo 10 described a strange, almost musical sound coming from the far side of the moon. Alexei Leonov spoke about a kind of cosmic concert playing directly in his mind. And Vladislav Volkov reported something far more disturbing, the sound of a crying child and a dog barking.
And at this point, this is no longer just a curious effect. Notice how the nature of these sounds changes, from neutral tones to emotionally charged patterns. A crying child, a dog barking. These aren't random. They're sounds deeply tied to human perception, to instinct, to emotion, which suggests that the brain isn't just generating noise, it's trying to interpret something. From a scientific perspective, experiences like these are usually classified as hallucinations. They're thought to be caused by factors like radio interference, radiation exposure, or interactions between magnetic fields and the nervous system. And all of these can affect the brain. At least in theory, they could explain effects like this. But there's a problem. That explanation doesn't cover everything. Yes, physical factors might trigger the process, but they don't explain the content of the experience. Why music? Why familiar or emotionally charged sounds? And more importantly, why do different people, on different missions, describe such similar experiences? That's why the FSS phenomenon still isn't fully understood. It could be a complex response of the brain to extreme conditions. Or it could be something more, something we're only beginning to encounter. And if space is capable of triggering states like this, then the real question is, what else might it show us when we move even farther from home? But even that isn't the limit. Some astronauts describe experiences that go far beyond sounds or images. Not just fragments of perception, but entire lives they seem to live through, while still in space, without the usual limits of space, and seemingly even time. And this is where the distinction becomes important. Because this is no longer a typical hallucination. We're talking about a state where a person fully identifies with something else, another being, another form. They're not observing it, they become it.
One astronaut once described an experience where he saw himself as a dinosaur. And it wasn't just an image. He could feel his body, his limbs, skin covered in scales, muscles contracting as he moved. He was walking across an unknown planet, feeling the ground beneath him, hearing the sounds around him, even sensing unfamiliar smells. And the strangest part, that world felt natural, as if he had always belonged there. This is full sensory immersion. Sight, sound, touch, even smell. The brain isn't just creating images, it's constructing an entire reality. And in that moment, the person does not doubt what is happening. For him, it is not an illusion. It is his current experience. But there are even more unusual stories. According to unofficial accounts, one astronaut experienced a transformation into the body of an alien being, and he claimed that it was neither a dream nor a hallucination. He perceived it as reality.
And this is where we reach the most controversial part. Because from a scientific point of view, such claims are extremely difficult to verify. But they can't be completely ignored either. There are simply too many similar accounts coming from different people. Another strange detail is the perception of time. According to onboard instruments, these states last only a few minutes. But for the person experiencing them, they can feel like hours.
This phenomenon is also known on Earth in extreme situations or during dreams. But here the scale is different. Consciousness doesn't just slow down time. It seems to create a separate timeline in which a person can experience an entire sequence of events. At the same time, astronauts rarely talk about this publicly. They understand how unreal it sounds, and they worry that such statements could call into question their psychological fitness. And that makes these accounts even more interesting, because these people have no reason to invent such stories. If anything, it would be safer for them to stay silent. And yet many of them discuss these experiences in private conversations. Some even warn newcomers about what they might encounter, which leads to a natural question. What exactly is happening to a person in space? Why does their mind start functioning in such a different way?
Some astronauts describe it as if the influence comes from outside, as if there is some kind of source that interacts with the brain and not just creates images, but seems to transmit information in a very unusual form. One of the first to publicly draw attention to this phenomenon was cosmonaut Sergei Krzyzewski. Later, test pilot Marina Popovich collected more than 2,000 similar accounts and came to a conclusion: people who go into space are not the same when they return. And if that's the case, then this isn't just about isolated episodes. It's a systemic effect, something many people encounter even if not everyone talks about it.
Many of those who experience this develop a desire to return to these states. They look for similar sensations on Earth in expeditions, research, in attempts to touch the unknown. They are drawn to places where the boundaries of the familiar world begin to blur. It's similar to what happens when someone crosses beyond the ordinary experience and can't fully return, because now they know that something more exists. Scientists, in turn, are trying to find a rational explanation. The most common theory is that these are powerful hallucinations, caused by stress, fatigue, an unfamiliar environment, and exposure to radiation. And perhaps that is true, but one question remains. Why are these hallucinations so complex, so consistent, and sometimes so similar across different people? And isn't that too much for a simple malfunction of the brain? And if we still can't answer that question with certainty, then perhaps we don't yet fully understand what is really happening to a person in space. But in space, it's not only the mind that changes. Sometimes the senses themselves begin to transform. In extreme conditions, human perception starts to function differently. It is known that in complete silence, hearing and attention become sharper. A person can even hear their own body, the heartbeat, the flow of blood, and effects like these have been confirmed by experiments.
For example, during tests in a sensory deprivation chamber, a space completely isolated from sound, some subjects experienced a sharp increase in perception. The brain, deprived of its usual signals, begins to compensate. It becomes more sensitive to any incoming input. Of course, there is no complete silence on an orbital station. Equipment runs continuously, creating a constant background noise. But even in these conditions, perception can change, and sometimes in very unexpected ways.
American astronaut Gordon Cooper claimed that while flying over Tibet, he was able to distinguish individual structures from an altitude of about 400 kilometers. Soviet cosmonaut Vitaly Sevastyanov reported seeing a two-story house in Sochi where he had spent his childhood. Other crews said they could even see moving vehicles. And this raises a question. Is this really an enhancement of vision? Or is the brain filling in the picture using memory and expectations? Because from that altitude, details like that are almost physically impossible to see. Which means, once again, we're dealing with the boundary between reality and interpretation. But sometimes the ocean looks even stranger from space. The crew of the Skylab station reported that in the area of the Bermuda Triangle, the water level seemed to drop. The ocean appeared as if it had sunk across a vast region.
And we're not talking about a small area, but a region spanning more than 1 million square kilometers. That's far too large to simply ignore. Soviet cosmonauts, on the other hand, reported observing unusual rises in the ocean, so-called sea domes, as well as massive waves stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Some even claimed they could make out underwater ridges at depths of hundreds or even thousands of meters. And this directly contradicts optics. Even the clearest water does not allow light to reach those depths, which means that seeing something like this from orbit should be impossible, at least based on our current understanding.
But later studies showed that in that region of the ocean, there actually is an underwater mountain range in that area, which means that the cosmonauts somehow observed something they shouldn't have been able to see. And that makes the situation even more complicated, because we're left with two possibilities. Either human perception in space really does become enhanced and starts functioning differently, or the brain somehow receives information that we don't yet understand and interprets it as visual images. And in both cases, we arrive at the same conclusion. Space affects the human being much more deeply than it might seem at first glance. And if even our senses, vision, hearing, perception begin to behave differently, can we be sure at all that we're seeing space as it really is? Or is everything we perceive beyond Earth just an interpretation, created by the brain in response to something unknown? Now imagine something even stranger. Somewhere in space, the emptiness suddenly fills with sound, something like birds chirping, as if dawn is breaking not on Earth, but in the vacuum of the universe. But can space actually make a sound?
In reality, the sounds themselves are an illusion. Scientists detected short bursts of electromagnetic radiation. They last only fractions of a second, but occur very frequently. And when these signals are converted into audio, they really begin to resemble the sound of birds singing. That's why they were named chorus waves. These waves travel through Earth's magnetosphere, the region where the planet's magnetic field dominates. They were first detected at a distance of about 50,000 kilometers, but later much farther out.
Recent data shows that chorus waves have been detected at distances of up to 165,000 kilometers from Earth. That's 3 times farther than previously thought. And more than that, similar phenomena have been observed near other planets: Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Which means this is not a local anomaly, it is a universal cosmic process. But behind this seemingly beautiful sound, there is danger. In reality, these waves are not audible and completely invisible, yet they are capable of accelerating charged particles to extremely high speeds, turning them into a flow, dangerous for equipment, and potentially deadly for humans. Put simply, it's like an invisible storm. You can't see it, you can't hear it, but it can damage equipment and cause serious harm to the human body. And that is its greatest danger. Previously, it was believed that such waves occur only near strong magnetic fields, but recent studies have shown they can also appear in more quiet regions where they shouldn't exist.
One of the hypotheses is related to plasma. Charged particles from the sun move along Earth's magnetic field and create instabilities. As a result, waves with a specific structure are formed. But recent observations show that this model doesn't explain everything, and it's possible that we're dealing with a more complex process. Another idea suggests that the cause lies in sudden changes in the magnetic field, a kind of jumps that trigger oscillations in the plasma. But so far, there is no definitive answer. For future space missions, this is extremely important, especially for missions to Mars and beyond. Understanding the nature of these waves could help protect spacecraft from streams of high-energy particles. The paradox is that one of the most beautiful phenomena in space may actually be one of the most dangerous, and that describes the universe remarkably well. It both attracts and threatens.
The farther we move into space, the more we begin to understand we're not just exploring a physical environment, we're encountering something that changes our perception, our senses, and possibly ourselves. And maybe the real question is this: when we look into space, are we really just observing it? Or has it already begun to affect us in return? And if that's the case, then every journey beyond Earth is not just a step forward, but a step into the unknown, something that may change us forever. But what if during such a journey, we encounter not waves and not effects of consciousness, but something else entirely? Something we can't immediately explain. Objects of unusual shape resembling discs, cigars, or even something like a human hand. It sounds like fiction, but such observations are reported far beyond random witnesses.
And it's important to note, this is not just based on personal accounts. Military pilots and crews regularly record such objects. There is video evidence, and some of it has been officially confirmed by the Pentagon as authentic, which means we know for certain that there are objects in the sky whose nature we still don't understand. These materials have even been reviewed in the US Congress, and the official position remains cautious. There is no direct evidence of extraterrestrial technology, but there is no complete explanation either, and this may be the most interesting part, because there is a big difference between "we know what this is" and "we are sure it's something ordinary." And right now, we're somewhere in between.
For example, in 1981, Vladimir Kovalyanok, aboard the Salyut 6 station, observed an unusual object. It resembled a finger, with a semi-transparent cone at the front. And it sounds strange until you try to picture it. An irregularly shaped object moving through empty space. No visible engine. No clear logic to its motion. The cosmonaut called a colleague, and he saw it too. But then something even stranger happened. The object exploded, and after that it split into parts, connected by a thin structure, taking on the shape of dumbbells. And this is where the problem appears. If it's a hallucination, it can't be shared by two people at the same time. But if it's a real object, then we don't understand what it is. And this is not an isolated case. In 2020, cosmonaut Ivan Wagner captured on camera a group of 5 objects. They moved in sync like a coordinated system.
Later, a possible explanation appeared that these could have been Starlink satellites. And this is a good example of how unusual angles and lighting can completely alter perception. But the key word here is could, because not all observations can be explained. Some of them remain unanswered. And if we imagine a real encounter with something like this, for an unprepared person, it could become a serious challenge. Fear, anxiety, a sense of complete vulnerability. Because the strongest fear is the fear of the unknown. When you don't understand what you're dealing with, the brain starts constructing the threat on its own.
In 1965, astronaut James McDivitt observed an object with structures extending from it resembling long arms. He claimed that he managed to take a photograph, but after it was developed, the image was gone. And details like this make these stories even more ambiguous, because they exist on the boundary between fact and the inability to verify it. Similar reports are associated with the Moon and with Mars. Some observations can be explained, others remain a mystery. Even NASA does not dismiss such signals. A dedicated group has been created to analyze unidentified phenomena, and according to their data, between 2 and 5% of observed objects still have no explanation. And that number is actually very important, because it means we don't understand everything, even in near-Earth space. And perhaps the most important point here is not whether such objects exist, but how humans respond to the unknown. Because space is not just a place, it's a test of our perception, of our mind, and of our readiness to face something beyond the familiar. And if we encounter such strange phenomena, even near Earth, then in the depths of space, everything becomes even more unpredictable. We can't reach those regions directly, but even observations through telescopes are enough to understand something is happening there that doesn't always fit within our current understanding.
And sometimes, discoveries like this literally break existing models, because we observe an object that, according to everything we know, simply shouldn't exist. Recently, such a discovery was made by the James Webb Space Telescope. In the Orion Nebula, one of the closest star-forming regions to Earth, it is located about 1,300 light-years away and can even be seen with the naked eye. But what Webb revealed turned out to be something very different. From Earth, it looks like nothing more than a faint, blurry patch. But up close, it's a turbulent environment of gas and dust, where stars are being born. A true cosmic forge.
And it was there that astronomers discovered more than 500 unusual objects, freely floating in space, not bound to any star. And that's already unusual, because planets typically form around stars. But here objects with planetary mass exist on their own. And more than that, most of them move in pairs. These objects have been named jumbos. Their mass is comparable to Jupiter. Their atmospheres contain water vapor and methane. And yet they are not considered full-fledged planets, because we simply don't have a model that explains their existence. 2 planets bound to each other, but not orbiting a star. That breaks our usual understanding of how systems form. At the moment, these objects are extremely hot with temperatures reaching around 1,000 degrees, But over time, they will cool down. And in theory, they could transition into a more stable state. And this leads to an interesting idea. If conditions change, could such objects become environments for something new? For now, this is only a hypothesis. But the fact that we are even asking this question already says a lot. The main mystery is how they formed in the first place. They may have developed directly within the nebula or been ejected from other star systems. But one object stands out in particular, Jumbo 24. It doesn't just exist, it emits unusual radio signals.
And the problem is that these signals don't resemble typical emissions. They are unstable. They don't fit into any known categories of radiation. And for now, we can't say for certain what is causing them. We're unlikely to hear them directly. But emissions like these may affect the human body. How exactly is still unknown. But one thing is clear, they are capable of triggering a sense of anxiety. And here, a familiar pattern appears again. Space doesn't just exist on its own. It interacts with technology, with the body, with the mind, and sometimes we don't even understand how.
And perhaps the most mysterious thing in space is not the objects, not the phenomena, and not even the signals, but the way it all changes us. And maybe the Solaris Effect doesn't begin somewhere far away, but at the moment we first try to understand the universe. And perhaps the most surprising thing, space is not silent. Every object within it, from massive galaxies to the smallest particles, produces its own kind of sound, as if the entire universe is one vast chorus, where each element has its own part. Of course, we don't hear this directly. Sound doesn't travel in space. But scientists use a method called sonification. They convert data into sound. Any kind of information, light, radiation, oscillations can be transformed into audio. And that's when the universe begins to sing. That's how we hear planetary magnetic fields, particles and accelerators, even sunrises on other worlds. But the most striking examples are galaxies and nebulae. For example, the spiral galaxy M74. It lies about 32 million light-years from Earth and resembles the Milky Way. It's known as the Phantom because of its faint, diffuse appearance. But at its center lies a source of powerful X-ray radiation, a black hole.
When images are sonified, each wavelength of light is converted into a separate tone. Radio waves, low sounds. Visible light, mid-range. X-rays, high frequencies. And the brighter a region appears, the louder it sounds. As a result, we can hear the structure of a galaxy as music. Another example is the nebula MSH11-52. It formed after a supernova explosion about 1,700 years ago. Its shape resembles a hand, and in the X-ray range, this hand also produces sound. And this creates a strange feeling, as if a structure that looks like part of a body also makes sound, even if not in the usual sense.
The nebula IC443, located about 5,000 light-years from Earth, is known as the jellyfish. It formed after a stellar explosion tens of thousands of years ago. Its structure is complex and uneven shock waves interact with different layers of matter, and that is reflected in its sound. It's irregular, sometimes sharp, sometimes almost fluid. Scientists even compare it to the murmur of something strange, almost like a sick current, and at some point, it becomes clear we're not just studying space. We're translating it into a language we can understand. But we're not hearing the universe directly, we're hearing its interpretation. And that brings us back to the central question. Where does reality end? And where does our perception of it begin? And if even the sound of space is the result of translation, how many other phenomena do we see and experience not as they truly are? But among all cosmic voices, there are those that sound especially unsettling. Not chirping, not melody, more like a deep roar or a distorted alien gurgling. And the sources of these sounds are considered some of the most ominous objects in the universe, black holes.
Once, they were considered rare anomalies, something exceptional. But now we understand they are everywhere. And they're not just holes. They are regions where familiar laws stop behaving the way we expect. And one of the strangest mysteries is their sound. It appears when a black hole consumes matter. A star, a planet, gas. When matter crosses the event horizon, an enormous amount of energy is released. In reality, this is not sound in the usual sense. It's vibration shockwaves in the surrounding gas. But when these are converted into audio, they begin to sound, and they sound quite unsettling.
In 2003, the Chandra Observatory detected such waves in a galaxy cluster in the constellation Perseus. At its center is a supermassive black hole, located about 250 million light-years away. What's interesting is that, in their original form, these oscillations exist at the lowest note ever recorded, so low that the human ear cannot perceive it. That's why scientists had to raise the frequency by dozens of octaves just so we could hear it at all. And the result is a sound that feels alien, heavy, extended, unsettling, as if space itself is issuing a warning. And perhaps this is simply our reaction. We hear something unknown and automatically interpret it as a threat. But there is another possibility. Such oscillations may actually affect the human body on a deeper level. Similar sounds have been detected around other black holes. For example, the object Min 87, the same one that was imaged for the first time. Particularly intense signals occur during matter ejections, giant jets streaming into space.
The most powerful sounds occur when a black hole consumes a star. As the accretion disk forms, matter accelerates to extreme velocities, and part of that energy is released back into space in the form of radiation and waves, sometimes with an echo-like effect. These reflected signals allow scientists to study the behavior of black holes, and even to hear how they interact with their surroundings. If we put this into human terms, it's a bit like the sounds a predator makes during a hunt, except here the scale is cosmic, and we're watching it from a distance. We still don't know how this kind of radiation might affect the human body, especially over long periods of exposure. But it's possible that it could trigger strong emotional reactions, anxiety, fear, even a kind of paralysis. And there's something symbolic about that. Black holes are objects you cannot escape from. And even their voice, which we only hear through translation, sounds as if it's warning us about exactly that.
And if even such distant objects can trigger such strong reactions in us, what would happen if a human were to get closer to phenomena like this? But there is an even more unsettling scenario. What if we encounter not an object, and not even something visible, but something completely hidden from our eyes? For example, a powerful stream of infrared radiation. We wouldn't see it, but does that mean it can't affect us? The problem is, humans perceive only a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. Everything else, radio waves, X-rays, infrared radiation, doesn't exist for us in a direct sense. But that doesn't mean it isn't there, or that it's harmless. Scientists have noticed something unusual. There is more infrared radiation in the universe than we can explain, as if there are sources of light that we simply cannot see. One astronomer described it like this: a mosaic with missing pieces. You can see the overall picture, but you know something is missing, and recent studies have offered a possible explanation. It appears that the universe may contain an entire population of galaxies that we simply cannot see.
These are the so-called dusty galaxies. They are so saturated with cosmic dust that the light from their stars doesn't escape in the visible spectrum. It is absorbed and re-emitted in the infrared range, which means the galaxy is there. It is active, but for us it is almost invisible. And if there are many such objects, they could account for a significant portion of the universe's infrared background. In effect, this means we are observing only part of reality, and the rest remains beyond our perception. But it still exists, and continues to interact with its surroundings. And that raises a question: if we cannot see these sources, can we still feel their effects? On the body, on the nervous system, on the mind? For now, science has no clear answer, but the fact that we are only beginning to discover such hidden structures already shows how incomplete our picture of reality is.
Older observatories can no longer answer these questions, but new telescopes and future missions will be able to look deeper, and perhaps for the first time, see these hidden galaxies. And this is where it gets interesting, because whenever we begin to see what was once hidden, We almost always discover something unexpected. And if even now we know that we're not seeing a significant part of the universe, then how many phenomena remain beyond our perception? And how might they be affecting us right now? And at the end of this journey, one conclusion becomes clear. Strange lights, cosmic sounds, and unexplained phenomena are not just stories. They are a reminder that space is not a cold, silent vacuum. It is far more complex, and perhaps much closer to us than it seems. Because every one of these phenomena points to the same thing. We are only beginning to understand the universe, and every answer almost immediately raises a new question, and we keep seeing proof of that. Very recently, astronomers discovered a new anomaly about 270 million light-years from Earth, a galaxy known as J0613+52.
And the strangest thing about it is the near-total absence of visible stars. A vast structure filled with gas, but without the familiar glow. What happened in that region? What kind of force could have extinguished the stars? Or are they simply hidden behind a dense layer of cosmic dust? And maybe that's the most honest answer we have right now. We don't know, but we keep searching.
And one day we will find the answers. Because understanding these phenomena is not just science, it's preparation for future journeys. Because the farther humans move away from Earth, the more often they will encounter things that cannot be explained right away. And perhaps the most important lesson is simple. Space is not just a place to explore. It is an environment that can change us. Our perception, our thinking, our understanding of reality. And the only question is, are we ready for it?